Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to the third annual Star Wars Lads Halloween special. This is one of my favorite videos to make every single year. This year, the topic is going to be my 15 favorite moments of Star Wars horror. I'll be running down my list. Before we do so, make sure you like the video. If you'd like to give me a treat for Halloween instead of a trick, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible Star Wars content coming here in the future. Sticking with the theme of horror and Halloween, we will have another episode of Legends Book Club out for you all on Monday, this time covering Red Harvest, the prequel to Death Troopers. Comment below, let me know your favorite examples of Star Wars horror. And without further ado, let's move on to the list. Number 15. Moving on to my top 15, and I do have Palpatine on Exegol as one of the more horrific things we've seen in Star Wars live action film. I love the way they decided to give Palpatine these dead eyes and the way he just looks like he's this rotting corpse as his spirit just sits inside this decaying clone body that's unable to support his life force. There are some great shots with Kylo Ren's red lightsaber glow on his face, but I think the thing that really cements this as horror for me is when Rey gets to Exegol and you see Palpatine floating because of this giant arm that's making his arms move and it's attached to his back. That's my 15th favorite example of Star Wars horror. Number 14. For number 14, I want to go back to Star Wars The Clone Wars, which has a lot of great examples of horror in the show. In Season 6, Episode 12, titled Destiny, Yoda arrives at the planet where life is created and where midichlorians are made. During that moment, Yoda is confronted with a dark side version of himself. Yoda rejects it as the dark side version of him keeps fighting him over and over again. Yoda then says that the shadow is part of him, but that he would not let it go, and the shadow slowly begins to lose power. Just seeing a dark version of Yoda is very, very cool, but also getting to see Yoda at a low point where he is afraid and able to confront his demons. That's something you don't expect very much from the Jedi Master, and a dark side version of Yoda with the red eyes and all, very creepy. Number 13. At number 13 on my list, I have Galaxy of Fear. Galaxy of Fear is a junior novel series that takes place shortly after A New Hope. It was written by John Whitman and contains 12 different Goosebumps-inspired horror stories. The books star Tosh Aranda and Zach Aranda, brother and sister, and their Shiido uncle, Mammon Hole. These are very fun stories. They are obviously kind of light horror because they're Goosebumps-inspired. They're meant for children. I wish I grew up on these. I probably would have ranked them higher if I did grow up on them. And they were actually the first example of Star Wars horror literature. And for that, I commend this series. Number 12. My 12th favorite Star Wars horror story is The Lair of Grievous. It is Season 1, Episode 10 of Star Wars The Clone Wars. In this episode, Count Dooku tasks General Grievous with proving himself worthy of being one of the Separatist leaders. Dooku leads Master Kit Fisto and his former Padawan, now Jedi Knight Nadar Veb, to the planet Vasek, where they discovered General Grievous's lair. I've always appreciated this episode for what it does. There are some scary images of Grievous climbing on the walls. The Jedi and the clones are wandering through this kind of Saw-style escape room and haunted house. General Grievous is sitting back, luring them into trap after trap, and it's easily my favorite depiction of General Grievous in the entirety of the 2008 Star Wars Clone Wars show. Number 11. Coming in at number 11 is Star Wars Dark Legends by George Mann. Dark Legends is a canon short story collection. It features in-universe short stories that are supposed to kind of maybe be canon, but they're kind of tall tales told to people who live in the Star Wars canon universe. George Mann has done a great job across the board with these Star Wars myths and fables style stories. I've talked about it multiple times in past videos, but I'm a big fan of his story A Life Immortal, about the characters of Darth Noctis and Darth Sanguis. A really twisted and disturbing Sith story, very much so, helps boost this book up here towards number 11. Number 10. At number 10, I'm going to put the chapter in which Luke experiences the horrors of Exum Panshard in the novel Shadow of the Sith by Adam Christopher. This is one of my favorite Star Wars canon novels, and one of the big reasons why is this new Sith Lord introduced named Exum Panshard. Exum Panshard's spirit exists in this mask worn by Kaiza, one of the acolytes of the Beyond, the main villain of the novel. But in one of the chapters, Luke puts on the mask and he sees all of the horrors that this monstrous Sith committed. Christopher uses some really dark language to describe what is going on and how Exum Panshard ruled with an iron fist. It's bloody, it's disturbing, it's very much so the darkest Star Wars horror has gotten in Star Wars canon. Number 9. At number 9, I'm going to put the Darth Vader appearance in Jedi Fallen Order. This is just a very intense and downright terrifying appearance of Darth Vader. It definitely helps that you have to play this moment as Cal. You go up against Darth Vader and of course lose immediately. Then it's up to you to run and try to escape him as he follows you from right behind. Some of the best horror video games like a Resident Evil 2, they have this kind of stalker element where you have to continually run away from a monster that you cannot beat, you can't face. It's a great way to end Jedi Fallen Order, and it's definitely one of my standout Vader moments in all of Star Wars video games. Number 8. When most people think of Star Wars horror, Death Troopers is the first thing they think of. I wasn't quite sure where to put this because Death Troopers is probably the most pure example of Star Wars horror. It's grotesque in its writing, very dark in its imagery, and in a lot of ways it's not super Star Warsy. It's got a lot of references to Alien and of course other zombie movies, and frankly it's not an incredible story, but its horror elements are there. Joe Schreiber writes this book and he writes it extremely well. It's paced very well too. It's a fast-paced, really edge-of-your-seat novel. But for the most part, it's a simple story, but yet very effective through the lens of Star Wars horror. Definitely not one of my favorite Star Wars books, but as a piece of Star Wars horror, I had to put it up here towards the top of my list, so it is number 8. Number 7. Coming in at number 7 is a very tragic and kind of underrated moment of Star Wars horror. It's going to be, of course, the burning of Anakin Skywalker and then the construction of Darth Vader. The scene in which Anakin Skywalker burned, that scene is always hit home. It's such an emotional scene. It's a very touching scene, but it definitely does qualify as Star Wars horror. Anakin's burnt body is one of the scariest images in all of the films, and then watching him be pieced together, the birth of Darth Vader in accordance with the birth of his children Luke and Leia. It's a great comparative scene, but it's also a very Frankenstein-inspired scene. Even the way Vader walks after, when he's crushing and destroying the room, everything's flying around, the blood flying from the machines, all of it is very much so monster horror. Number 6. At number 6, I'm going to just call it the Night Sister entry. The Night Sisters are obviously very horror-inspired. Particularly what I want to talk about in this entry are the times they resurrect the dead. In the Clone Wars Season 4 episode 19 called Massacre, Mother Talzin and the Elder Old Daka use dark magic to resurrect dead Night Sisters, creating a zombie army. We've also seen the Night Sister magic be used in a lot of other horror ways. Of course, you have the return of Maul. In the episode where Savage finds Maul, you see him attached to spider legs. It's a very gruesome looking image. And then Mother Talzin eventually uses the magic to replace his lower half in a similarly Frankenstein-y kind of way. And then most recently in Ahsoka, you have the undead Night Troopers, where the three great mothers use their magic to resurrect those stormtroopers, and you have Ahsoka, Ezra, and Sabine fighting them off. These are all great examples of horror with magic, especially kind of the occult side of Star Wars horror. Number 5. At number 5, I have a classic, and it's the cave scene in The Empire Strikes Back. The only reason I don't have this higher is because it could be considered not purely horror, but I think that final shot is what really cements it as kind of a horror moment in Star Wars, whether psychological horror or just physical horror by seeing Darth Vader's head cut off and then of course revealing that it's Luke Skywalker. You get to see the deepest, darkest fears of Luke. Fear and the dark side, of course, being part of the imagery of Star Wars horror. horror. And as a kid, the face of Luke in that helmet used to very much so scare me. His eyes being open, the fact that you recognize the face immediately. It's a short moment of Star Wars horror. That's another reason it didn't quite make it past number 5, but it's so iconic and it's so classic, it definitely needed to be in the top 5. It's my number 5.
Number 4.
Coming in at number 4 is something that just came out this year, actually, and it's from Star Wars Visions Volume 2. It's the second episode, titled Screecher's Reach. Screecher's Reach follows the character of Dull and her two friends, Bathan and Quinn, who take a journey up to Screecher's Reach where they encounter spirits and demons and a very dark test for the main character of Dull. It starts out with a scary story, and then you see that story unfold, but it's the animation that really cements it this high for me. The short is from the studio cartoon Saloon. The pencils, the shading, the dark versus light dynamic, the designs of the demons, it's very haunting. This was by far my favorite episode of Visions Season 2. It's one of the purest examples of horror in Star Wars film or TV. I highly recommend you watch this. If you haven't seen Star Wars Visions Season 2, you don't need to see the other episodes. Just watch this if you're looking for something spooky but Star Wars related during the Halloween season.
Number 3.
I mentioned that Screecher's Reach is just pure horror from start to finish. My number 3 is also Star Wars horror from start to finish, but it's 2 episodes instead of 1. It's episodes 7 and 8 of Season 2 of Star Wars The Clone Wars, Legacy of Terror, and Brain Invaders. These are 2 very creepy episodes of The Clone Wars that deal with Geonosian zombies, brain-eating worm parasites that will possess you and turn you into a mindless monster. You see a really creepy Geonosian queen, but Brain Invaders is Star Wars Television's version of Alien from start to finish, mixed with zombie horror. Also seeing this back when I was younger, it really stuck with me as a cool example of Star Wars horror, and it's always one of the first things I think of when I think of Star Wars and horror.
Number 2.
Number 2 for me is something that has stuck with me since the first time I saw it. Something that made me absolutely fall in love with this character and with this show. It's General Grievous's first appearance in Star Wars Clone Wars. Everything that Genndy Tartakovsky does with this scene is so creepy, so haunting, and genuinely turns Grievous into like the Michael Myers of Star Wars. Or at least that's how it looked like he was going to be until eventually they, turned him into less of a menacing character. But that's besides the point. Beginning this scene with all of these Jedi, including Jedi Masters like Ki-Adi-Mundi, Aayla Secura, and Shaak-Ti, all just being exhausted from their fight with the droids, talking up how General Grievous's tactics and strategy has driven them to this point. Hearing General Grievous's menacing voice outside, taunting the Jedi. And then the sequence where all the Jedi have their lightsabers turned on. You see the sweat dripping down their heads and their hands. You have the killing of Shaggy, and then great shots where the Jedi are all back to back. Grievous sitting in the rafters, the light slowly appearing on his face. He is absolutely a monster in this scene. It instantly made General Grievous one of my favorite Star Wars villains. Such an incredible scene. Absolutely deserves number 2.
Number 1.
And in number 1, a lot of you might have already guessed it, but I do think this is by far the best example of Star Wars horror. It's the hallway scene from Rogue One, where Darth Vader just massacres these rebels. Like I mentioned with the General Grievous scene, there's a lot of great slasher elements, some great use of shadow and the juxtaposition of light and dark, the lightsaber being the main light source in the hallway, the way you start hearing his breathing without seeing anything, and then the lightsaber turns on, the faces of the rebel soldiers when they see Darth Vader and they start shooting at him, the ways Vader kills these guys by pulling their guns away, slashing them up like of Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees, throwing a guy against the roof and cutting him in half, the screams, the way the guys are pounding on the door, yelling, "Help us." It definitely boosts up in the ranking for me because it is a genuine live action Star Wars horror scene, but I'm not sure if there's a better scene out there for Star Wars horror than this. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Again, please like the video, it really helps me out. Subscribe to the channel for more Star Wars content. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I'll see you all next time. Alright, time to get out of here.
What is this? Are you recording a Halloween special without me?
What? A Halloween special? No.
I thought we were bros.
We are. It's just...
I'll show you what happens when you record a Halloween special without me.
Oh wait, Kylo, please. Cut the credits. Cut the credits.